Are you making the right map for your world? This is the question we're going to be talking about today. Over the course of this series, I've gone back to basics in map making for your world as a tool for world building, exploration, and storytelling. And the maps that I've created for the series have all been within the same world. And the maps have been of different styles as we've gone through. And so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat a style so that we can talk a little bit more about how you can not only make that map look a little bit more aesthetic for those of us who want to do that in our world building, but also so that we can talk about focusing on putting the right things on your map. Hello adventurers, my name is Ryan and welcome back to the Red Quills. If you are new here, the Red Quills Fantasy Map Making channel is a map making channel that does just that. I focus almost exclusively on making maps for your fantasy world. So if you are someone who is exploring your own world, if you are a DM, a GM, a writer, a storyteller, this is the place for you to hone your map making skills. And if you are looking at your maps and you are constantly wondering if there's something else you should be doing, if you feel like they aren't complete enough, they don't have the right feeling, they don't have the right details, then this series of videos is for you. And today I want to focus on making sure that you are making the map that you actually need for your world building. Most of us use maps as a tool for storytelling as well as world building. We don't come in to a story having had a map first. We flesh the story out with the map and they both evolve together, bouncing off one another. And keeping that in mind, most of us also at the same time think of maps as being these finished products. We think of them as having the certain kind of details, a certain look, a certain aesthetic to them. And as we create our worlds and we flesh out our stories and flesh out our maps, we become disappointed with the fact that our map doesn't look completed when it is, in fact, not yet completed. As we're going through and making our stories, it's important to be aware that map making is a process that you need to keep innovating, changing, and adding to things as you flesh out your world and understand more of your story. A map that you have finished is not in and of itself a map of a finished world. It is just a finished tool for your storytelling. So what I want to talk about now is the different kinds of use that you can put your map to and what kind of details you should be putting on it for that use. As we do that, I'm going to go through and I'm going to create this map of the world. Now, I have created a world and I will be following through with it for the rest of this series. Everything will be in the world of Andermonde. I made the original map using ballpoint pens in the first video of this series. If you want to go and check that out, that is fun. And I have referenced it in the other videos that have come out in the Monster Lairs and the other Game Master map videos in this series. And so we have mapped several monster layers. We have mapped the new world and the continents there. I want to go back to the old world now, and I'm going to reuse the style that we did for the original map. Now, normally, if you have followed the Red Quills, you'll be aware that I tend to change the style of map every single week so that I can showcase different ways of making maps and show different aesthetics of that. And so this is like, what? We're repeating a style? Who could have foreseen this? Well, the reason is that I've been reflecting on how I teach map making on these videos. And a lot of the time, these ideas that I put out, these aesthetics, these attempts and experiments at map making are often just one and done. And I don't get the opportunity to really make things look as good as I would like them to look. I don't get to refine, to hone the craft of the individual map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that style from the map of the new world and I'm going to make a map of the old world using that as a basis so that there is some consistency and use the principles of previous videos in order to make this map look good and build on it to make sure that it is useful to us and for what our purpose is. Now, if you haven't caught the previous video in which I made that map, I would suggest going and watching it, mainly because I am not going to cover a lot of the same details in this video because I just don't have the time to do that. There are a few parts of the map that are important when you're establishing an aesthetic of it and making sure that it looks right for your world building if you're trying to give it to someone else. It's important to know what the hook is, what the purpose of it is, making sure that you have consistency, the differences between natural and artificial landscapes, and all those kinds of things so that you can make sure that it looks good. And we're going to be using those principles for this map, but I'm not really going to address them. Instead, what I will address is the kind of information that we're putting here on this map. And we're going to start, of course, as always, with our sketch. I'm going to get out an A3 sheet of 180 GSM watercolor paper. It is not important to have watercolor paper. I've been saying this the entire series. The first map that I did for this series was A3 printer sheet, and I use ballpoint pens. The only reason I'm using, guys, the only reason that I am using watercolor paper for this is because I have an absolute pile of it sitting here in my office. And so if you want to use printer paper, you should use printer paper. It doesn't really matter. Just go a little bit slower and be aware of the limitations of using it. So in a minute, I'm going to stain this map so that it looks a little bit weathered and matches the style of the original. Be aware that a thinner piece of paper will require less water and it won't be as absorbent. So just, take it easy. Take it slow. Having measured out the area that I'm going to be using for the sketch, I'm going to put in the equator and I'm going to divide it into the grid squares that I had on the original map. So this is going to stretch from the tropic to the north to the tropic to the south with the equator in the middle, and that's going to give me a fair grid to use so that I can translate the original map onto this one with very little distortion whatsoever. Because it is on the equator, I don't need to worry about distortion like I did previously, and that means that our scale won't need to be adapted to the north or south of the map. This is going to be fairly flat. That being said, once I've gone through and I've penciled out what the continent looks like, I'm then going to get out a cup of coffee. I know, I drink tea on this channel. I would recommend everyone drink tea. Coffee is the devil's liquid, and it tastes awful. That being said, I got some double strength instant coffee, espresso, so that I could get a nice dark color on this map. I want to layer it up 3 times in order to make sure that it looks good. Make sure that you don't oversaturate your paper. You don't want it to be too wet because it'll turn gloopy and it'll lose its structural cohesiveness. Take it slow and be careful with putting it on. Spread it over onto a wider area. Take more time between putting the layers on. And if you need to add more layers with less water, allowing time to dry between them rather than fewer layers with more water, as I'm doing here on this porous paper, then that's just something that you'll need to do. Be aware of that. This map, by the way, took me about 3 hours, 3.5 hours to do. Factor that into your awareness. This is coming from someone who has dedicated time to put into it and who has a lot of practice doing it. If you put an evening to one side in order to make a map of your own, then be aware of the time that it will take, and it will probably take you a little bit longer than it took me in order to do this because you are unfamiliar with the processes, because I'm going to assume that you don't have a map making channel and you don't tend to make, 2 maps a week. Having gone through and stained it, I'm then going to come through and do the mountains first. I'm going to use an illustrative style. Now, I am going to make a reel on how to do my illustrative style that's just dedicated to that. It uses fine liner pens and black ink and different shading systems and details. And that will be its own reel. It's going to follow this. So I'm not going to talk about it too much today. You can find it on my channel in a couple of days. So keep your eye out for that. But I am changing from the previous map to this map how I've shaded the mountains, because I'm using ink this time. I'm using that hatching system rather than using the coffee as I did for the previous map, just because I want to maintain that aesthetic, because I want that consistency. So I'm going to do the labels first and I'm going to move on to the mountains. Now the labels I am going to have lined up as much as possible with the previous map so that the locations are all the same. I'm going to pencil them in so that we're sure about that. And then after that point, I need to decide what the most important detail that I want to be focusing on here. Now, obviously, this is the old world map. And so this is the best place to start talking about making sure we have the right details for the function of the map. And for that, I'm going to talk about the series of maps that we've done so far. The first map that we did, the simplest map, is what I'm going to call the visionary map. This is the one to begin with. This is the broadest strokes. This is the one with the fewest details, but with the most potential. And in order to make a map like that, what we need is broad strokes, big picture details. We need very, very few on the ground details. What we're looking for instead is the general shape of the continents, the distortion on the world, where all of the continents are located in relation to one another, the general positions of cultures, societies, alliances, and nations, and the most important significant settlements in the world. Other than that, the only real things we need to know about are where deserts are, where mountain ranges are, where, the tundra begins. Once we have an understanding of that, which we can show through the relative density of the civilizations on the planet, then that's all we need that map for. That's going to be our big picture view. That's our visionary map. Then, once we have our visionary map, we're going to come in with our planning map. And our planning map is a more detailed view, and this is one of those planning maps. It's going to have a lot of on-the-ground details, but very few in terms of world-building details. We're going to need to know where the borders are, what the names of the different nations are, where they share resources, where their focuses are, how widespread they are. We need to look at where their capitals are, where their road network begins, how easy it is to travel from one point to another, and broader economic details, and just a broader on-the-ground view of the world. No more details than that, because this is just our opportunity to explore the world. We're not prescribing too much to it at this point. Again, we're building up the amount of detail as we zoom further and further in. This map is going to be slightly different from the one previously because I'm going to be adding in some more illustrations, and I'm going to be really pushing that feeling that this has been established for a long time, which means there's going to be fewer natural details and more artificial details, so that we can see the difference between the first map and the second map. And then we come in with the last map. This is the working map. This is the one that actually does the heavy lifting. This is the one with details in it, and that is a map that I would give to a dungeon master or a game master. If you're a storyteller, this is the map that has all the details that is difficult to write down. This is what you can rely on, you can turn to if you're in a bit of a bind and you haven't thought your way through it. This is the map that will tell you how thick the vegetation is in different areas, what the economic situation is, where the ruins or plot points can be found, how difficult it is to travel, what the coinage is like, where the bridges are, whether the roads are paved or unpaved. We're talking about an incredible amount of detail, and most of them should be implied. So having talked about those different kinds of maps, one of the issues then that can come up for a novice map maker is wanting to have a map with all of those details on it from the very beginning, which is not only an incredible amount of work to try to get first up, but it also doesn't allow you to grow from the first point. If we begin with our first map, with our visionary map, and we don't add any more details than we absolutely have to, then that allows us to turn to that when we need a broad view. We don't need to stress about how all these different details interact with one another. As we narrow our view when we go through into planning and working maps, then those maps can give us more and more detail and understanding about specific parts of the world. It limits the amount of work that we need to do in order to make the story feel real. And we can also preserve an aesthetic feeling to the map, because a lot of the time, not only do you want the map to do the work and tell the story and help you explore the world, but you also want it to look good. And all of these different functions, using it for, broad sweeping strokes of planning, and also as a reference point. And also it's got to be good looking. And also you've got to be able to give it to your players and have them understand it and be able to find things. All of these different functions mean that you come out with a map that is either too cluttered or too bare, either it's got wrong details or too much details, or it's just not going to work for what you want. So rather than compromising and trying to get a map that does a little bit of everything but nothing really well, I would sincerely suggest that you make a series of maps in this order. This map of the old world is going to have a different focus from the original. And again, these are just sort of broad strokes of what kinds of maps that you need, but thinking deeper and deeper into what kind of details you need in a specific map, and having many different maps of different scales and different focuses will allow you to flesh the world out. And the more you make the maps, the more you will be able to think about the world from different perspectives. You'll flesh it out even unknowingly as you go through. Having made one map will give you a passing knowledge. Having made 10 maps will give you an in-depth knowledge. Having made 100 maps, as I'm doing for the Atlas project that I'm doing, you will know intimately every single part of the world. But to take a little bit of a detour, the important part is to love the process. That is the fundamental moral of all of my videos. is that if you're creating a map and you just want it to be a tool, if it's a throwaway kind of concept, you just want it to be a picture or look good, and you're trying to achieve that, then I would heartily recommend that you consider this less as an end result and more as a process, a journey of map making. Making a map is not the end, and a lot of the time, if you make one map early in the process, you will find that that map changes quite a lot at the end of the process. If you create a process of map making that you enjoy and you teach yourself to do it in a way that is easy for you to do, using principles like the ones I'm doing here, where you don't need fancy materials or a lot of time in order to make something that looks fairly good, then you can come out with maps regularly that update your understanding of the world and are still good for you to give to readers or players. So at this point, I've got some illustrations on there. And what they are is the 8 wonders of the world in Andamond, and I really wanted to kind of give a feeling of what that world looks like, a mix of ancient structures and new ones. So we've got, ancient sculptures carved in the desert mountains, as well as, a parallel to the Eiffel Tower, which is a docking station for airships. It helps us to really flesh things out, and the illustrations themselves really go hand in hand with the map. And so then I'm going to come through, I'm going to fill this with, as much as possible, with detail, with where smaller settlements are, where the roads are, where the different districts can be found, so that it looks and feels as much as possible like one of our historical maps. The previous map felt a little bit bare, and that was the point. It's supposed to be this sort of undiscovered country. I want this one to feel crammed with detail and still look good. And the way to do that is to prioritize what we're putting on the page. As I've said in previous videos, we want to make sure the important labels are on first, and then the significant natural details. Then I've put the illustrations on because I don't want them to be cramped or crowded. They're not as important as the major labels, but they are still significant. Then we come in with everything else, with the details of the world building that make this map feel real but aren't significant to the storytelling. The tiny villages and towns aren't going to come up in a story very much as the capitals will, or the other plot points, but they will make the map feel more fleshed out. And this is a process of world building as well. As I go through with this series, I'm fleshing this world out more and more and more. I have not sat down and figured out, as before I've made these maps, what the world looks like, or what the different capitals are called, or how the different cultures sort of interact with one another. I had a couple of concepts: the struggle between technology and magic. I had a few different names. I had some monsters that I wanted to kind of focus on, and airships and banditry, and even an old western shootout. And past that, I'm just using these maps as a world building tool to flesh the world out, and the requirements of the map are guiding me in that. This map needs to look like it has a lot of detail in it, so I need to add a lot of detail, and doing that will force me to think about what the different languages are going to be like, what the syntax is like, whether or not there are different suffixes or prefixes in the naming structures that sound similar or different to one another, which places are at war, where there are ruins, things like that. Being forced to add detail requires you as a world builder to think about what you're putting on the page, and pushes us to world building we wouldn't ordinarily do. And so then, once we've put all that effort in, and we've done a few illustrations, and we've fleshed it out with a compass and some line work, and I've added a bit of a scale in there as well, we end up with this. And I wanted it to feel like a 1700s map of Europe, and I think it really does. Not only that, but it matches the style of the previous map. We have that consistency. We have an aesthetic hook. We have a real focus on what the purpose of the map is and what we want it to feel like. We're in the planning stage of the mapping of the world, and this is going to be a great resource that I could give to the players. It doesn't have quite as much detail as a DM map would, but it's certainly got enough that you could give it to readers and they could use it as a jumping off point. So let me know in the comments below what you think of the style, whether or not you appreciated me repeating it so that you could see it again, and whether or not you're excited for this full collection of the maps of Andamond that I will be finishing off over the next few weeks as well. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to chat about them. You can find me on the Red Quills Discord, and you can join the Red Quills Patreon if you want the downloadable of this map. It is available there. This is the official steampunk style that I have developed for the red quills. Let me know what you think of it in there. I know there are fewer cogs and pipes than you'd normally aesthetically get, but this is something that I think historically parallels what you would find around that historical period in Earth's history, and it does still maintain some details that I think would be significant for a steampunk setting. I'm also going to be coming out with other maps over the next few weeks with details that are specific to the world, like a map of the air currents for air captains, so that they can use it to pilot airships across the surface of the world, as well as, putting more focus on the different functions of maps. So a game master's map versus a player's map versus an aesthetic map. So keep your eyes peeled for those. And in the meantime, let me know if you have questions and I'm happy to answer them. Thank you for watching this video. And until next time, happy mapping.